Welcome to Bosses with Baggage. We are here today with Eddy Anderson, who is a dear friend. Welcome, Eddy.
How y'all doing? How you doing, Sherry?
We are so thrilled to have you here today. If you have never heard Eddy's story or had the privilege to hear his story, it's pretty off the hook. And so I'm so excited to share it with you. As you know, Bosses for Baggage, our vision is to share these dark nights of the soul that we go through and how it's led us to a life of service. And Eddy is one of those people that when I thought about starting this podcast of, this is the ideal type of story that I want to tell, because the more we're willing to share those stories, right, the more we can make other people feel comfortable sharing their stories and not have the shame associated with addiction or having those dark nights of the souls, hitting rock bottom, right? Because for many of us, including myself, that is our real true superpower. So Eddy, I'm so excited to have you tell your story today.
Yes,
so let's start at the beginning. Let's start with a little bit of just kind of where are you from? How did you grow up? And let's talk about kind of everything that led up to the things started going off the rails at this point. So tell us what happened in your life before.
All right. I just wanted to say, Sherry, it's an honor to be here with you. And you are one of my dearest friends. So we're covering two bases at one time.
It's fun to be able to do this with a friend.
So I'll just start. I was born and raised here in Dallas, Texas, and my mother was an English teacher in the DISD for about 40 years. So she placed in me a understanding that education was important. She also wanted me to get into a private school here in Dallas that's pretty esteemed. And I tested to get into that school and did not make it the first time. It's called St. Mark's School of Texas. Didn't make it the first time, tested again the next year, and got in on the caveat that I repeat the 7th grade. So I started St. Mark's in the 7th grade and attended it through the 12th grade. Played all sports, was pretty good at sports from my childhood, and it was a wonderful experience. And that's kind of the foundation that I plug into as I live today, is those experiences at St. Mark's. One of the things we did at St. Mark's, though, is that we had drinking parties after most of the football games. So you go from 9th grade, 10th grade year, all the way to 12th grade year. I received a scholarship to Texas Tech to play football. And by the time I arrived at Texas Tech, I was verified as a partier. Drinking was just part of the culture. And then when I look back, I see that there were issues that came up while I was in high school, but, without any kind of guidance, without any kind of consequences, you don't even examine those. So I just took everything that I learned at St. Mark's and took it to Texas Tech.
Yeah. Yeah. So then did you play football at Texas Tech?
I did play football at Texas Tech. I had a good career and got some accolades, but I found myself in trouble because of my addictions and my alcoholism. A lot of it was covered up at Tech because it was kind of the culture, but I was beyond what was acceptable. I got myself into some trouble. I had an agent that paid me under the table to sign with him once I was drafted, and none of those things worked out. And then I tested positive on a drug test, along with some other things, and was basically suspended for the team for my last game at Texas Tech, which at that time I needed 4 catches to be the all-time leading receiver in the history of the school, and missed that opportunity.
And for those of you, who are listening, who aren't from Texas, like, football is life here, right? It is a big deal. Texas Tech is a big deal. Playing football at Texas Tech is a big deal, right? So I grew up in Connecticut, and so football was That's the thing they do somewhere else. So for anybody who's listening, it's that's a really big deal. So tell me a little bit about kind of your drinking. So was it drinking mostly, or were you drugs as well? Or
It was basically in high school. It was strictly alcohol. Never saw drugs in high school. Never was around anybody that did drugs in high school. But by the time I got to tech, you know, being around grown men and being around people from different backgrounds, I was exposed to a lot of things. And so by my second year at tech, someone had brought cocaine into my dorm room. My first reaction was, I don't want any of that. And this, but my ability to stand on my own and not fold the peer pressure and those type of things. He was like, come on, man, just try it. Just try it. It's not bad. So I tried it. We went to the recreation center at Texas Tech and played basketball. And I played basketball like I was Michael Jordan. Couldn't stop me. I was playing against the Tech basketball team. I mean, I was between my legs. I was almost dunking. And I got back to the dorm room and said, we need some more of this. And so that started.
sign me
Yes,
up.
that started I was addicted from day one. Just that's the way things happen. And I won't say that I was rich in college, but I had access to more funds than some of the people around me. And I think, as I look back today, that probably, we were just wanting to have a good time, but I was someone who could actually afford to buy it. And so I look back and just put all these little pieces together of how I fell into addiction as tough as I did. And it started innocently enough, if there is an innocence with cocaine. It started, just going and playing basketball.
Yeah, I think when my husband, as you know, because you guys are best friends, was also a college athlete and then a professional athlete afterwards, and it just alcohol was just given to you, right? I mean, it was just because you were an athlete, right, and you were, like the man, you were like the team was God, right? Where like he's like, I never paid for a drink until I retired at 30,
Right.
because it just gets handed to you, right? You get to go to all the good parties, you get to go to all the good bars, people buy you stuff, people give you drugs, right? It's so much easier to have the access.
Yes, that is true. Just being an athlete in college, you get preferential treatment in some regards, and the social life. Everybody wants people from the football team there or the basketball team, and so we would go out and Billy's perspective on it is right. We never really paid for anything. But when you're an alcoholic and an addict, you go beyond what the free that they're willing to provide. So I ended up spending my money just because I never stopped. I didn't have the boundaries. So alcohol was provided. There were drugs and alcohol, but I was a person that went even beyond that.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the things that, sorry to interrupt, that, is one of the definitions of someone who is in addiction, right? And particularly in alcoholism, that I never really understood until I went through the process of getting over my addiction was, we're the ones who didn't, even if we say we're going to go and have two, we never do. We always miss the mark. We always, close the bar. Like when everybody leaves at 10 or midnight or whatever, right? We were the ones who always stayed longer because as soon as we put it in our body, it just manifested that, the allergy, and we just kept going and going and going and going and going. And I think, for anyone listening to this that isn't sure if they're, in trouble, that's a real clear sign that, if you're always closing down the bar, if you're always at the point where, you're not only, completely stumbling down drunk, but then you're like, oh, I need to go get cocaine now.
Right.
You might need some help. And you sound like I was the same way. Like the first time I drank all the way through, I drank until I was.
I can say that I rarely drank just for the taste of alcohol. I was always drinking to get to a destination. And had no idea what that destination was, but I knew that I would get messed up along the way, and that was generally okay. So I was, I never just drank just to sip and be sociable. I always drank with a purpose. And I think, now that I look back, that purpose was escape, but I didn't know that then as a 22-year-old, 23-year-old.
So what happened? So, you fail a drug test.
Mm-hmm.
And do you see that as kind of the turning point as things sort of started going downhill, or tell us
Well,
what happened
things
then?
things were going downhill long before I failed the drug test. I had insulated myself with my teammates who would do everything from take drug tests for me, provide me with urine. I mean, the coaches would tell me when I was on a drug test. So I had, I was pretty insulated, but even none of that could stop me from, just crossing the line and being self-destructive. So I ended up not playing professional football, even though I tried out for about 20 teams. And I remember specifically, I had a workout with about 20 teams. I went to Austin to visit my cousin the weekend before. The workout was on like a Wednesday. I went to Austin for Friday, and I didn't come back for a week. And I missed the workouts. I was in Austin partying, and I was just like, to heck with football. I've played it, it, I loved the game, but I didn't love being being a just being visible like that. I wanted to just crawl and go away because I felt, my self-esteem was attached to the people knowing that I played football, and so when that didn't work out, of course, my self-esteem lowered even more, and all I wanted to do was just go away and just be a regular person, what I considered to be a regular person. I didn't want anything to do. I didn't want to continue on that track of being a public figure. That's the word I was looking for. So after football, after Texas Tech, I came back to Dallas. And so I had only snorted cocaine, had never seen crack, didn't know anything about crack, had heard about it on TV. So we're talking 1989, 1990, kind of when it was an epidemic kind of. So I come back to Dallas, and I have one side of my family that's good, one side that's bad. And I, of course, called the bad side and was like, hey, I want to, I want to purchase some cocaine, but I've been gone for 4 years. And it just so happened I had a BMW while I was at Tech. And, so I picked my cousin up, and we go to the absolute worst part of Dallas you could think of. And we go to this house, which, Lubbock, we didn't have houses where you could go buy drugs. It was, you knew somebody who would provide, and so on and so forth. So we go to this house. My cousin goes in. My cousin was a school teacher as well. We go to this house. My cousin goes in, and he comes back out, and he says, I got good news and bad news. They didn't have any powder. They said, come back in an hour, but they had some of these. And he showed me a bunch of rocks in his hand. And he said, I got a couple. You can try some if you like. But he said, come back in an hour. So we rode around in my car for about 45 minutes, and I'm watching him smoke this substance. And I'm thinking to myself, man, that's crack. I want no parts of that. Like, we talked about people who were smoking crack while we were in Lubbock. And I rode around for 45 minutes, Sherry, and then something in my brain said, well, cocaine is cocaine. And what's the difference if you smoke it or if you snort it? So I said, man, let me try that. And that was probably the worst decision I ever made in my life. 21 days later, I tried to commit suicide for the first time. After 3 weeks, I tried to commit suicide. And so, yeah, and so
Wow.
that's at the age of 24. So I'm 57 now. And, snorting cocaine was one thing, but smoking cocaine was something completely different. No socializing, no interacting with other people, just holed up in a house or hotel room and just, just decaying is the way I describe it, was my experience. But it was something that my body and my brain instantly, like, this is it. This is the high that you have been looking for all your life. But at the same time,
Wow.
I knew that it was going to kill me. I was going to kill myself. And this started, it's been 30 years now since that fateful day. And I am still attempting to live my best life. It's something I still struggle with.
Wow. But there's a long 30 years in between. So tell us what happened then, because you said the first time you tried to commit suicide. So tell us
It
more.
didn't work the first time. Yes.
Obviously, or any of the
Yes, it didn't
times.
work. So, my experience at that point in my life was, I had been a public figure. I had gone to this rich private school, and I didn't feel that I was anywhere close to representing that part of my life. And one of the things I learned is that if you are on the streets of Dallas or any streets, and they don't care about your background, they don't care if your mother was an English teacher, they don't care if you play football. Only thing they care about is, do you either have some drugs or can you provide some drugs? And so I found that this is the environment that I gravitated to, because nobody asked me questions. Nobody, talked about how we won this game, or it wasn't my friends from high school who were going on to be doctors and so on and so forth. These were just people. Only thing they just cared about one thing, which is what I cared about. I cared about that one thing. So
Yeah, and they didn't have any expectations, right? Because that's what happens when we fall into addiction. People still have the expectations they had before, but we don't want to meet them anymore, right? We've got a new ambition, right, which is to just be, high or drunk all the time, and you can't live in both of those worlds.
Right. So I chose to live in the dark world, as you say in your opening. So I ended up getting with a group of people who committed some crimes, and I ended up having contact with our penal system. So basically in 95, I committed some crimes and was sentenced to 20 years in Texas Department of Corrections. And the thing is, I had met a nice, wonderful young lady kind of right before, I just finally kind of, what I say, threw in the towel. And she happened to get pregnant as well. So I was sentenced to 20 years in prison, and I had to serve 10 years before I was eligible for parole. At the same time, I had a daughter who was born a month after my sentence began. And so, just that whole period is almost like a blur. But one of the things that happened was my daughter was born. The lady that I met became my wife, and we married proxy. So we married after my sentence began, which, it's hard to find someone willing to sign on for that in today. So I spent that time there, and 5 years into my sentence, my wife passed away from breast cancer. So that was extremely hard to deal with. My daughter came and lived with my parents. So my parents were the primary caregivers for my daughter. And I was released in 2006. And I said, I will never touch drugs, alcohol, or come back to prison again in 2006.
Somehow I feel like that's not the end of
I
the
was just letting it
story.
marinate for a second.
Let it marinate.
Let that marinate.
I like the pregnant
Yes.
pause, though, that you gave me to drive the story on. That
Yes.
was nicely
So
done.
10
Thank you.
years, you would think that would be enough to say, I am done with drugs and alcohol, right? Now, let me just say that while I was at Tech, they sent me to a treatment center. And they sent me to Hazleton in Center City, Minnesota. When I went to the treatment center, I had a BMW, I had a beautiful girlfriend, I had a news magazine that were doing a story on Texas Tech wide receivers. All of this was waiting on me. And he said, you are going to die, you're going to be in an institution, or you're going to jail. And I said, man, you are crazy. And everything he predicted or wrote in this King Baby pamphlet came true in my life. So that's the caveat. So I get out in 2006, and I have made up my mind. I am not doing crime. I'm not doing drugs. I'm not drinking. I'm going to be a father. And I tried to set out to be the best dad that I could for my daughter. So we spent a lot of time together. my idea of parenting was take your daughter to all of your sports stuff. And that worked for about a year and a half as I re-engaged with my high school buddies and I re-engaged with some of my tech buddies. But I had a little girl, and sports only goes so far with someone who is not into sports and not into, she was more of an introvert. And it took me a while to kind of understand what that meant. And then I had to transition to being like a drill team dad or just doing girl dad stuff, which was cool. I ended up enjoying it. So I stayed clean from 2006 to 2013. I went to AA meetings, but I didn't participate in the AA meetings. I basically stayed clean, just white knuckling it and just saying my life experience has been so bad that I don't want to repeat it. So I'm not going to use drugs and alcohol. I'm going to prove all these people wrong that what they say about me. And I just made my mind up and said, this is how I'm going to live my life. But what I didn't do is grow as a person. Had no clue that you have to, if you want to get something out of life, you got to put something in. You have to invest in yourself. You have to learn about yourself. I never did any of that. I just did the next thing in line, what I saw my parents do, work, try to provide, but I never grew as a person. So I ended up starting my own business in 2009, and I had a skip trace company from 2009 to 2013. I don't know if you know what skip tracing is, Sherry. That
No.
means you pay your bills.
Got
Skip
it.
tracers locate collateral for banks, insurance companies, and they repossess that collateral upon investigation and return it to the banks. So I had a company that we repossess everything from motorcycles, boats, planes, cars, trailers, whatever was collateralized, we repossessed it. So I spent my days manipulating, lying, being untruthful, because at the end of the day, people very rarely will say, okay, Mr. Anderson, I haven't made my car payment in 6 months. You can come get it. That wasn't the way it went. It usually had to do with me trying to outsmart them and figure out where that car was located. So I spent 4 years just basically misrepresenting the truth. And my spiritual life declined to the point to where I felt pretty empty. I think one indicator was that I asked my mom to come to work for me. She had retired. I was like, Mom, you'd be a great office manager. My mom said, I want no parts of that. I want no parts of that industry. My daughter had the same response. So in 2013, because I hadn't addressed any other thing in my life, I started going to the casino with my dad. And that went from going to the casino with my dad to going to the casino myself. And then I ended up losing about $15,000, $20,000 over a 45-day period. And part of that was some of the money that I used to pay my employees with. So the person I was in business with said, you are gone. And I took that and it coincided with a relapse. So after 6 years of not using any substance, things were falling apart around me. And I said, I'm going to go get high. And I went and got high. I got drunk. And so 3 months from my relapse, being removed as a vice president of this company, I decided I was going to commit suicide by cop. That I didn't want to return to a life of crime. I was tired of fighting my addictions. I just didn't think that I had it in me to be sober. And I just thought, man, this world would be better if I wasn't here. And this wasn't the first time that I thought that, but this was probably the realest time that I thought, I'm going to carry this out. And so
So you said suicide
by
by
cop, suicide by police.
okay, what I don't know what is
Yeah,
that?
so suicide by cop is when you decide you're going to commit suicide, but you don't have the courage to do it yourself. And you use the police department, our law enforcement officers, to carry out your suicide. And so
Is this a thing?
it's if you Google suicide by cop, you will see there have been many instances where people have tried to commit suicide by policemen. Yes.
Okay, so you make that decision, and then how does that work? I guess you have to put yourself in a situation where a police officer would shoot at
Yes,
you.
that is correct. That is
Yeah.
correct. So remember when we talked about you could go into certain parts of town and they just see you as, the next drug addict. Police can sometimes have that same attitude. So I knew that if I was in South Dallas and acting crazy or did something stupid, they would call the police. The police would get there. It would be over for me. Um, so I walked into a liquor store. I got a orange Sunkiss. I took it to the counter and I told the person I was not paying for it and I had a knife in my possession. There was a security guard in the liquor store and they called the security guard over and I told him the same thing. He called Dallas police. It took about 10 minutes for Dallas police to get there and I was waiting outside with the security guard. And it was just going through my mind. This is my last day on this earth. And I had one thought where I was like, man, if I could just talk to my mom right now, I might not do this. And so I asked that security guard if he would call my mother. And that security guard told me no. So once he said no, then I was like, okay, we're doing it. So the police arrived. They started barking commands. They tasered me. I took the taser. They tasered me in my chest. I took the taser out, threw it on the ground. I ran around the corner in front of this building. They cornered me off, and I did have a knife in my possession. And I remember them specifically saying, if you take a step, we will shoot you. And I just said, Lord, here I come. And I took a step, and they shot me twice. Shot me in my hand and shot me in my stomach. Um, so, that's my dark day of the soul. That night when I decided that I was done on this earth, and I really was seriously done on this earth. I could have jumped off a bridge or, stepped in front of a car, but I thought surely this will be it. But the police actually ran and gave me life saving measures. They didn't just shoot me; they also gave me life saving measures. And the ambulance got there. I was on life support for a short period of time, and I survived. I survived. So, that started a whole another chain of life events. But that's my darkest moment. That's the darkest moment of my soul that night, June 27, 2013. So we are coming up on 10 years since that happened. So it's appropriate that I get to share this with you
Wow.
today.
Oh, that's amazing. I'm so glad you're here. Wow. Yeah, what must it be? I mean, it really is a suicide attempt, right? I mean, you hear other people who do it maybe by other means, but so I have to imagine that the next step where there were some ramifications from that, right? They don't just say,
They did not say that, oh, yeah, this was a mental health moment.
oh, we're so sorry you wanted to commit suicide. Go ahead.
Yes,
We'll get you a little therapy and everything's going to be
yes.
better.
They say that now, though, because, we're not a threat anymore. But so I was in the hospital for 50 straight days. I lost 50
Wow.
pounds. I was chained to a bed because when you're in the hospital and you're in custody for Dallas County, they have an officer in there with you and you don't just get to run around the room. They have you chained down. But I survived. And so I tell this when I talk to different groups, but I said, God had something else for me to do in this world. But the judge said, you're going to go do 5 years. so So the judge, the DA, the judge, everybody came together and it was agreed that I should get the minimum amount of time that I could get for what I did. But because of my previous record, they had to send me to prison. So there wasn't a probation or anything on the table because of my previous record. So I went down to TDC again in 2013 and I did the whole 5 years and got out in 2018. So I am going on being out 6 years. And two things happened while I was there. So I knew that I had to address my drug and alcohol. And I said a prayer to God, God, if you just bring me back to society, to my family, one more time, I will proclaim that you are real, and I will try to be of service. And, we have no idea what that looks like. Like, I had no idea what I will be of service really meant. I could have just been of service to myself or to the people in my family. Like, I didn't have any idea what being of service was. I took a course while I was there called Bridges to Life, which brought victims of crime into the prison system. And we had small groups, and it helps people who have been victimized see inmates as people, and it helps the inmates see the people that they victimize as human beings, and it kind of breaks that cycle of just seeing people as victims, and it helps with people who've been victimized, helps them with forgiveness. So I took that class, and I was so touched by that class that I was, it just kind of fortified. Man, God did not put me on this earth to victimize people. And even if I'm in my own way, I don't have any right to make somebody a victim. And in that class, the person who was over the class from Bridges to Life asked me, well, Eddie, what do you think about the officers that you victimized? And I thought, what part of I got shot do you not understand? Because you didn't hear that I got shot. But there was some truth.
I got the
Yes,
scars.
I have the scars. I'm the one that got shot. What do you mean I victimized the officers? But there was so much truth in that question that I really started thinking about. Those officers did not wake up that day thinking they were going to have to shoot somebody. And, when an officer shoots somebody, they go on death leave. Maybe it traumatized them. I didn't even give any of that any thought. And so I started working on changing my attitude towards law enforcement. And then I realized that they actually saved my life, because they could have just shot me and let me bleed out. But I remember the female officer coming and pressing my stomach and just saying, hold on, ambulance is coming. So I started just to think, my story is a little different, because even though the police shot me, they helped me. And it just kind of changed the whole narrative that you hear, especially with Black men, police shootings, all of that stuff. It just changed the whole narrative. So when I was released in 2018, I had a whole different attitude. And, God has a funny sense of humor, but I sold cars when I got out in 2018. And one of my first customers was the chief of police of Addison. And so I'm on a monetary, I'm just trying to make it. And I go on a test drive with the police chief. And so while we're in the car, I ask him, what's your opinion on people who commit suicide by cop? And he strongly said, I think people who commit suicide by cop are cowards. And I was thinking, well, this won't be a sale, because he knows I'm not asking for a friend. I'm asking, for myself. But we did do the deal. But I just remembered that moment that, a lot of things come full circle when you're kind of trying to find your way. So one thing I recommitted to was my sobriety. And, we can commit to it, but you still got to put some work into it. So I returned to going to AA, and I actually started participating in AA. And so a lot of things have happened since then. My body was in terrible shape. So I've had to have 3 surgeries since I've been out. I got a mesh put in my stomach. I had 2 hip replacements over the past 5 years, and just was in so much pain because TDC they just said, you can breathe. Okay, then you're okay. Everything else is cosmetic. So I needed these procedures, but TDC wouldn't do them. So I had to come back home to get those procedures. But things have changed. And I just attribute to being sober, and I attribute to, just God has a plan for me in my life.
So, and one of the coolest unfoldings of the plan is sort of this new job you've taken.
Yes.
Like, it hasn't been all that long, but I remember you coming to us, you're like, guys, you won't even believe, I have goosebumps just mentioned, talking about it. You won't even believe what just landed in my lap. How does this those things don't happen unless they're like divinely ordained, right? And so tell us about the job that you're doing now.
So, you met me in the Frisco group when I pretty much had nothing. Like, I was borrowing a truck from my mother. I was working at Ranger Stadium for minimum wage. And I was living in a sober house. And this was 15, 16 months ago. And I just.
Which, like, let's take a second. 16 months ago is not that long ago.
Yeah.
Like, let's just take a moment on that, right? Like sometimes, I mean, I know we've been talking like all the way back into college and stuff, but this is like watching this happen in your life has been so incredible because it really has happened very fast. And it happened like when you got sober, you started doing the work and you really committed to that life, right? It just.
So when I got through my hip surgeries and just, I was like, I need to make a complete and total decision to not have any substances in my body. I worked at Ranger Stadium for minimum wage, stayed in a sober living house, was just, barely making it, but I was sober and I was working the steps. And so first break I got was I applied, my background is challenging because on paper I look good until you do a background check and then you're like, oh, wow. Yes. But I can say vice president. I can say.
Never mind.
Yes. I cannot tell you how many offers I got to come to work and then how many letters I got subsequently to say we're rescinding our offer. But you have to keep going. The right door is going to open. So I went from working at Ranger Stadium to I got hired by a company called Chime Solutions, and they are a second chance employer. And my crime, I was over 5 years old, so I passed the background screen. Went to work for them. Within 3 months, was promoted to manager, which, as an addict and an alcoholic, I would say some of the most talented people I've ever met in my life are addicts and alcoholics and people who have the greatest work ethic, people who have the biggest heart. So my work ethic was never in question. It was just, was somebody going to give me an opportunity? So they gave me the opportunity. And this whole time I kept in touch with that prison ministry called Bridges to Life. And they asked me to come tell my story in Austin back in October at a little small country club setting. And I told my story, and then they said, we want you to come to Arlington and talk to our regional fundraiser. And that was in November. And I did that in November. And at that fundraiser was the owner of my company. Her name is Tony Brinker. She was married to Norm Brinker of Brinker International. She has a nonprofit called One CommunityUSA. And so after I spoke, she approached me and said, I want to talk to you. And so we set up a phone call and, she told me that she worked with vets and law enforcement and first responders. And she works with guys who are being released from prison. And she was considering me for a associate manager position with her company. And we interviewed for about 30 days because, at that time I probably had 8 or 9 months of hard sobriety, living life right. And she wanted to make sure that her investment in me would not come with, it would not tear her company apart or my life. She just wanted to vet me. So we did that. And on January 23rd, I started here. And so I get to work in the office with me. I'm the only civilian in this office. I have 3 coworkers on the Chop Talk side, which is where law enforcement goes in the barbershops and salons. And we have workshops and we have events to build community relations. And then in my department, I have a director who was ex-military, and then I have a coworker who was ex-military. I am the only civilian in this office. And I spend my days going into the same prison that I was incarcerated on. And I teach a 40-hour class to those guys, pre-vocational, restorative justice. I bring people from the community who have been incarcerated and who have not been incarcerated into the facility to talk to these guys about different avenues, different mindsets, just different ways that they can change their life. And then I use myself as the example. If look, I tell them there is no greater dope fiend than Eddie Anderson. And if Eddie Anderson can stop using and stay sober and change his life, you can change your life. And that's my pitch. That's my pitch to them. So now these guys are, we work with them on the outside when they get out as well. So I spend my whole day is spent in service, being in service to these guys. But I get just as much as what they get out of it, because every day you have to fortify your life in some form or fashion, or you go backwards, is the way I look at it. Then I didn't have that internal healing to have some peace. And life still isn't perfect, man. My finances in disarray. My social life could use an upgrade. but I have no complaints about where this journey is taking me.
Oh, wow. Thank you so much. You are an inspiration. And again, like, your journey is just exactly what I wanted to talk about here, is this idea of, we have redemption, that our, your greatest struggle of being, where you were is the only reason why you can be of service to the level that you're able to be of service today, right? You get to be a role model that, I could never walk in and be a role model to them in that same way, because I haven't been there, right? I haven't gone through it. I haven't, slept in the same cell that they have, right? And I just think there's something so powerful when we get to go back and help the people who are struggling with the exact same thing we were, or are in the exact same place that we were. That is just so magical. And I just, we need to tell more of those stories. And so I appreciate you so much for sharing your story here with us today. You are one of my favorite people. And I appreciate you so much. Thanks again.
My pleasure. And I just, want to say that I wish you the best with this endeavor. I know you're going to knock it out of the park. You have everything that you need to continue to rise and shine. So I'm just glad that I'll be around to see you shoot up like a shining star.
And you will be at my house every day when football season starts.
Can't wait till July.
There's lots of Eddy in my house as soon as football season starts. So anyway, love you.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank y'all.